Hi, friends. Welcome to the Full and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Meg McCabe, and if you're here, it means you're ready for some aha moments that will inspire you to create a more vibrant, authentic life that's full of joyful moments, deeper connection, inner peace, and courageous action towards your dreams. Let's get started. Did you know that more than 1 in 4 women experience insomnia or the inability to fall or stay asleep? If you're part of the 25% of women who struggle with sleep, imagine a life where you could feel a peace of mind at bedtime, knowing that the moment your head hits the pillow, you'll drift away into a restful night's sleep. Today, I have Morgan Adams on the show. She's an expert sleep coach who overcame insomnia herself and now supports others in improving their sleep and their relationship to sleep. In this episode, you will learn how your mindset impacts your sleep and different practical ways to improve your sleep quality today. Our sleep is so important for our health and healing, and the thing is, we all need it. So I know that this episode will be super helpful for anyone who has decided to listen today. Enjoy the show. Hello, Morgan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Meg. I appreciate you inviting me on.
I am so excited to have you on the show because I feel like sleep is, first of all, I'm a huge fan of it. Love sleep. I need it. I think rest is something my community struggles with. And I'm also sure that sleep is something that many people listening with have struggles with, whether they're not getting enough of it, whether they feel guilty when they do get enough of it. There's just a lot to think about here. So I'm really excited to just dive in on this subject with you today.
Yes, same here.
Yay. Okay, so let's just go straight into it. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey with sleep and how you eventually became a sleep coach?
Sure. So I would say about 20 years ago, close to 20 years ago, I developed insomnia as a result of a relationship issue, a romantic relationship issue. And I ended up having trouble falling asleep, which is called sleep onset insomnia. And how that manifested was basically having to wait 1 or 2 hours before I would fall asleep. It was lying in bed, tossing and turning, very frustrating. After about 3 months of this or so, I decided, I couldn't continue anymore with this pattern. So I went to my primary care doctor and was prescribed Ambien, which is a very popular prescription sleep aid that I'm sure most people listening are familiar with. And the pill actually helped me get to sleep faster, as advertised, but there were a lot of residual side effects that were questionable for me. And basically what that was being very groggy the next day, feeling a lot of just kind of fogginess. And I was at a job where I had to write press releases on the spot, and I couldn't really produce the kind of work quickly enough that I should be. And it was quite annoying at that point. So after about 8 years of this, I met a guy who is now my husband, but at the time we were newly dating. And he said to me, when you take that pill at night, you actually kind of become like a zombie. You act like a zombie, and it kind of freaks me out. And I was like, whoa, okay, I just got called out. So I decided at that point, it was time to kind of break up with the sleeping pills. And I went about it the wrong way. So the way that I did it, if you're out there and you want to get off sleeping pills, don't do what I did. So I ended up tapering the pills down myself. Now, tapering is the way to do it. However, I didn't actually consult my provider who prescribed it originally to give me that taper schedule. So the correct way to go about this is to contact your prescribing provider. Say, look, I want to get off the sleeping pills. Set me up on a schedule to do that. And then ideally, it's helpful to work with a sleep coach who can help you implement that plan and give you support along the way, because it's not easy for everybody. So then I got off the sleeping pills just by sheer will and grit. I got off of them and I slept well for many years. I wasn't like the most spectacular sleeper, but I didn't have insomnia anymore. And that was a relief. And then fast forward to the first month of the pandemic, March of 2020, my sleep started to take a little nosedive. And with all the chaos, the unknowingness, what's going on, I started to get fearful of going back into that world of insomnia again. So I went to Google, started researching sleep, ways to make it better, and applied some of those techniques to get my sleep back on track. And during this process, I ended up just posting on Facebook organically, like what I was doing to like get my sleep back on track. And I came to find out at this point that a lot of other people were struggling with their sleep as well during this period of time. And they were like, oh, this is really helpful. So I got this revelation summer of 2020, Morgan, you need to be a sleep coach for women. So 2 years prior to this, I had been dealing with my own breast cancer issues. And that really set me on a trajectory of wanting to help women with their health. But I didn't know really how that would play out. And then once I found this fascination with sleep, it was like off to the races. I know what I want to do with my life and let's help women get better sleep. So then at that point, I did these certifications, health coaching, sleep coaching certifications, and then started this work in 2021. And it's been amazing to help women get their sleep back on track because there are so many women out there struggling with sleep. It's quite astounding to me.
Wow. I really appreciate your transparency with your story and how you ended up, making some mistakes along the way and then having to learn healthier techniques to get your sleep back into a healthy place. And I'm really curious about, I guess for people listening, how do they distinguish, like, for instance, what exactly is insomnia versus poor sleep?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So the technical definition of insomnia is when you have trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or you wake up too early for at least 3 days a week. Now, for it to be a chronic, it would be going on for 3 months. For it to count as acute, it would be less than 3 months. And another very important point to add on to that is in addition to those issues with sleep, there has to be, from the person's perspective, some kind of negative consequences during the daytime that are unfavorable. So that could mean many things. So in other words, there's this sort of objective criteria that I just spoke of, but there's also this subjective criteria. It has to bother you. You have to be uncomfortable with what's going on for it to like really be fully, counting as insomnia. And basically, most of us in our lifetime are going to have an acute insomnia episode lasting less than 3 months. And those are mostly due to tragedies, crises, deaths, divorces, job losses, illnesses. And so it's very normal to have, a short bout of insomnia. But what it ends up happening to a lot of people is it morphs into the chronic insomnia. And that's really when you need to kind of get some intervention because it obviously hasn't worked itself out like the acute insomnia has. So that's really the difference because, Meg, everybody all over the place has trouble sleeping from time to time. It's part of the human condition to struggle with sleep every now and again, to have a bad night. The baby's crying, the dog's barking, maybe you ate too late or whatever. So sleep disruption is a normal part of our existence. But the insomnia takes on quite a different flavor than just a normal sleep disturbance here and there.
Okay. And so when someone is, maybe their sleep is disturbed due to a stressful thing like a relationship or a breakup or a loss, and then it turns into that chronic insomnia, what usually is that difference? Like what causes somebody's insomnia to be more long-term?
Yeah, that's a great question. So quite often when people have insomnia, they are unknowingly perpetuating it by certain behaviors. So some of the behaviors that we see quite often are things like napping late in the day, which basically cuts off your sleep hunger for your actual sleep at night. Things like sleeping in the morning because you didn't sleep well that night, that is disrupting your circadian rhythm. Also having a lot of caffeine that can backfire. And so there are these many, many behaviors that people with insomnia do to actually cope with what's going on, and it tends to backfire. So in order to correct for that, there's something called CBT-i, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And that is actually the gold standard way of dealing with insomnia over sleeping pills per the American Academy of Medicine. So part of what I do in my practice is I incorporate some of those key principles of CBT-i so that we are changing people's maladaptive sleep behaviors, reversing those, and also, very importantly, changing their beliefs and attitudes and thoughts about sleep. Because ultimately what we want to do with somebody who has insomnia is mend their relationship with sleep, because they see sleep as something very negative. They get anxious about sleep. They look at their bed or their bedroom and they're like, oh no, another night of sleeplessness. We want to mend that relationship and make it so that they see sleep as their friend, not as their foe. So,
wow. I hadn't even really thought about that part of it, the part that's the mindset behind your sleep and your actual relationship with sleep. And, thinking about comments I've heard from people with insomnia. Like I remember talking to someone before they went to bed and they're like, and now the battle begins. Like that was the thought that came up. And I was like, oh my gosh, because I haven't dealt with any chronic sleep issues. So it just felt astonishing to me that somebody would view sleep as a battle.
Yes. I love that you said that, because that's like the perfect verbiage of what somebody with insomnia might say. Their bed is a battleground, and they approach going to bed with this sort of trepidation, this sort of like, okay, is it going to happen tonight or not? There's not a healthy relationship. And what we're trying to do over the course of working together is like, let's reestablish a healthy relationship with sleep, because most people at some point in their life did have a healthy relationship with sleep. So they know that it's possible, but it's just so hard to believe in the moment when you're struggling so much.
Yeah. I couldn't even think about long-term battles with sleep, how emotionally distressing it must be to be lying awake at night, chronically, probably angry and upset that you can't get the rest your body needs so desperately.
Yes. I mean, I'm working with many clients who lie there awake at night, their husband or their partner is soundly sleeping and they get sleep envy. But honestly, most of the problems that I hear about, that I experienced myself, were daytime consequences of the insomnia. Feeling the fatigue, feeling the irritability, feeling the loneliness. Because insomnia is a 24/7 disorder. We think about it almost like this happens at night, and for sure it does, but it's the daytime consequences that really can be so elusive and so hard to manage.
And when you say loneliness, are you saying you feel alone in this journey?
Yes. A lot of people who have insomnia do feel very alone, very misunderstood. I'm a member of a couple of forums for people who have insomnia on Facebook, because I really kind of want to understand. I mean, although I've been through this myself, it's been a minute, right? But I just want to kind of tune into like what they're saying in the moment. And they do feel very lonely because their people in their immediate circle don't quite understand. And so what often happens is that, and this is so common with my clients, they have a well-meaning partner or parent, and every morning that partner or parent says to the client, how did you sleep last night? Did you sleep better? And the client, it just puts more focus on that client's inability to sleep or the struggle with sleep. And it almost creates an undue pressure of having to answer that question every morning. You also see things like, I'm just thinking back to this woman on Facebook who I follow. She's not in a group. She's just an acquaintance, but she's constantly updating everyone about her insomnia. And people will chime in the comments. Have you tried chamomile tea? Have you tried meditation? And it's just like, gosh, you guys, these are like, I've been through this. I know I've done these things. So it's like people want to help, but they don't know how to help. And so people with insomnia end up feeling quite isolated, misunderstood, alone. And that's, I think, in part why they join these forums. And I do discourage people, if you're out there, from joining a forum like this, like the one I'm talking about on Facebook, because it's almost like people are competitive about like how less or what kind of a lack of sleep they have. Like people will ask, like, how much sleep did you get last night? And it's almost like, well, I got 4 hours. I got 3 hours. I got none. And it's not a helpful dialogue. It doesn't move you closer to the healing process.
I think that's a good warning. Yeah, that's a really helpful warning for people. I see that in so many different spaces online. As eating disorder world, it's the same thing.
I'm sure. I was just going to say, when you're in that situation, as tempting as it is to want to like reach out and kind of pull in other people with insomnia, it's actually better to work with somebody who's a professional who is not going to kind of perpetuate some of the things that are going on and give you incorrect advice or unhelpful advice, I should say. So it's better to just find someone to work with one-to-one versus just sort of relying on the other people who are there because they're not getting better.
Right. It's like you want to surround yourself with people who've already accomplished the thing you're looking to accomplish.
Yeah. It's like the blind leading the blind, right? You just doesn't make a lot of sense to be there.
Yeah. Wow. So you mentioned earlier, I do want to circle back to the idea of CBT for insomnia. You mentioned there are some principles that you work by, and I want to hear kind of what some of those are so that people who might be struggling can start to like maybe make some shifts in their own life.
Sure. So there are a couple key ones that are mainly behavioral in nature. So let me paint a picture of somebody who has insomnia and they spend 10 hours in bed only to get 7 hours of sleep. Their body's only able to produce 7 hours. So what we end up doing is we end up giving them a sleep opportunity of time in bed of 7 hours because we know that's what their body will produce. So in essence, this is consolidating your sleep to make it higher quality sleep so that you're not spending time in bed needlessly struggling and worrying and doing all those things that are not sleeping. So that's one of the key principles. It's often called sleep efficiency training in some circles. Then there's the other concept called sleep reconditioning, which basically is when you are struggling to fall asleep and you're in bed, you should remove yourself from the bed because you don't want to pair your bed with anxiety. If you're starting to feel anxious, tossing and turning, remove yourself, go to another room, do something relaxing and dim light. And then when you become sleepy again, go back to bed, right? So those, I would say, are the two main behavioral components of CBT-i. So that's the B in the CBT-i. The C is the cognitive part, right? So that is actually changing our thoughts and beliefs and attitudes about sleep. So quite often what I'll see is a client coming to me and they're like, I've got to get 8 hours of sleep. I've got to get 8 hours of sleep. And so what I work on with them is really educating them on some basic parts of sleep. And one of them is, and this could be helpful for a lot of people, is that 8 hours is not like the holy grail of numbers. We've been fed this myth that 8 hours is how much sleep you need. And some people need a little more, some people need a little less. And quite often what we'll find when we're working with people is that they need less sleep than they thought they needed. You know, they need more sleep than they're getting currently when they start working with me, right? But when they are talking about their goals, they're like, my goal is to sleep 8 hours a night. And by the time we finish working together, they're like, I'm sleeping 7 hours a night and I'm actually really good with that. That's actually the amount of sleep I need. So somewhere in this process, you kind of figure out what your sleep need is. You start to understand your sleep patterns better. And, this technique has been around since the 1980s. It's the gold standard. I personally find that weaving mindfulness into this CBT-i protocol is very helpful because it helps people really be in the moment, helps them develop a feeling of acceptance when they are struggling with their sleep. And there's sort of a spillover effect I've noticed into people's daytime lives. and situations that are not sleep specific. Coping mechanisms. It helps people, I think, cope a lot better with stressors in their life that are sleep related or not. So yeah. So the mindfulness, I think, is a key component that I think, depending on who's doing the CBT-i work, sometimes it's not as emphasized enough, but just throughout my work, I have found that it is very helpful with my clients. So if they've had a bad night, for example, they don't feel as defeated by it. They're more accepting of it, and they're better able to cope with the consequences the next day.
So how would mindfulness look when someone's going to bed? Like, could you paint a picture of someone who's practicing mindfulness, who has insomnia, how they might experience applying that as they go to sleep?
Yes. So interestingly, it's actually not as much done before bed as during the daytime. So I work with my clients on practicing mindfulness during the day, because I find that they can at some point, kind of later on in their progression, do the mindfulness at night. But you want to actually not put pressure on yourself to do the mindfulness at night, because sometimes people will use mindfulness, or meditation, I should say, as sort of like what I call a sleep effort. Some people are like, okay, I'm going to meditate now and it's going to make me sleep. Well, okay, scratch that. We need to reconfigure really what your goal is. Your goal with the meditation is, to relax and to feel calm. Sleep could be a byproduct of that, but don't make that your end goal. So therefore, by doing it during the day, you develop a comfort level with it. Your expectation isn't to sleep, but it is to kind of be in the moment, to find some relaxation. And that can kind of spill over into the evening time. So it's actually interestingly done more, at least in the work that I do, during the daytime than at night.
That makes so much sense, because I'm sure you just want to avoid putting pressure on yourself once you're about to sleep, right? Or once it's time to go to sleep. And I think that's one question that keeps popping up for me while we're talking is, I know mindfulness throughout the day is something you've just kind of explained, but how do people start to break up with that pressure they're feeling? I feel like the pressure to go to sleep just mounts to be greater and greater for someone who's struggling with sleep. How do you start to help that person feel less pressure?
Yeah, that's a good one. And that it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while for most people to get to the point where they're in a better headspace. But I think what we end up finding is that through this process, they will start to understand that the consequences the next day of not having good sleep are more manageable. So, for example, when you have insomnia, quite often you will kind of shrink your life a bit in order to kind of protect your sleep. So here's an example of a client I'm working with. She didn't want to go out to see friends late at night or whatever, or go to a concert or do something late at night. And I said, listen, I want to challenge you to actually do that thing, right? Do that thing that you're scared of. And we're going to see how you cope with it the next day. You could actually get great sleep, or you could get crappy sleep, but we're going to find out. So what she did was she went and did the thing. She didn't have great sleep, but she actually did all of the things she was supposed to do the next day. She rose to the occasion. She went to work. And so through that, she built confidence in her ability to kind of withstand the effects of not having a good night of sleep, so that the next time she was invited out, she could remind herself, hey, just because I have a bad night of sleep doesn't mean that the next day has to be terrible. Because quite often, a lot of times people think bad night of sleep equals terrible day. That doesn't necessarily have to happen. I mean, also the converse is true. So think about all the times you've had a wonderful night of sleep and you've had a crappy day. You can't always predict how well your day is going to play out by your sleep,
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you pointed that out, because I hear this limiting belief in there, right? Which is, if I have a bad night of sleep, I'm going to have a bad day. There's so much inflexibility in that. And it's very black and white thinking that causes distress. It's a cognitive distortion to just decide, oh, I guess my sleep dictates the quality of my day. And it's always bad if the sleep is bad. That's not true. I know it's almost like you have to surrender and know that your day could go any which way,
Yes,
regardless of
that's
how the
exactly.
sleep is.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a lot of the mindset work that comes along with the CBT-i. That's sort of the cognitive part, challenging behaviors, challenging thoughts, realizing, hey, you can still have a good day, even despite bad sleep.
What other thoughts or beliefs are people usually stuck on when they come to you?
Yeah. I think one common one is that, quote, I'm a terrible sleeper. Quite often when I start working with someone and I'm asking for their history, I've always been a terrible sleeper. I'm just terrible. And they continue to use that verbiage. And I remember one client wrote in her notes to me, she said, my SHIT sleep. So she kept referring it. And I said, hey, wait a minute. I said, the way you're talking about your sleep right now is so inflammatory. Let's take a step back. And how can you say the same thing to me without damning your sleep, without throwing stones at it? So it's a way of speaking more kindly to ourselves about it. So instead of saying I'm the worst sleeper, saying, I'm having some challenges with my sleep right now, but I'm working on it by doing these things. And I'm confident I can get things back in order. That's not a positive Pollyanna statement. I'm not ever telling my clients, do these affirmations to say I'm an amazing sleeper, because if you don't believe them, it's just useless. But if we can shift that negative kind of talk into at least neutral territory, I think we're making a step in the right direction.
Right. And even shift it away from your personal identity or something that's permanent about you. I feel like that's something, if someone's identity is, I'm a bad sleeper, there's no flexibility there. Like if you say, sometimes I have challenges with my sleep, we know that means there are days you don't have challenges, and it's not necessarily your identity.
Yes. And one of the reasons I don't really use the word insomniac anymore is because I don't want people to use it and identify with that label. Even though I had insomnia, like I told you about for 8 years, I rarely ever say I was an insomniac, because you're somebody who's going through a journey with insomnia, right? You're not necessarily quote insomniac, because when you say you're that, it makes it, I think, harder to kind of look at yourself in a different way.
Yes, 100%. In the mental health space, we use first person language. I think that's the right term. Essentially, you don't want to attach your identity with a word. So we wouldn't say, oh, I'm an anorexic or a schizophrenic. It's not that way, because you do want to have that distance or that separation a little bit between you and what you are struggling at. It's something that you have, not something that you are. So I'm glad to hear that the sleep community is doing the same.
Yes, there's some parallels here, which is really interesting.
Yeah, lots of parallels. So I'm curious about how people can slowly start making improvements to their sleep. Right? I know I would love to know the things that people listening can start to do to start to shift. I love the mindset work, and I think working with a sleep coach sounds so helpful in just that regard. But what about day-to-day tips and sleep? I don't know, sleep efforts. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, actually, it's not a good thing. In the world of sleep, a sleep effort is not a good thing. But what I would say for people who are on a journey to get better sleep, where I would probably start is by working on managing your circadian rhythm better. A lot of people out there have very mismanaged, dysregulated circadian rhythms. And there's a couple ways that you can do this that I'll go over that are extremely simplistic. And it's almost so basic. You're how can that work? So,
okay. Can I quickly ask you, just for listeners' sake, what exactly is a circadian rhythm?
Yes, let's start there. So circadian rhythm is basically your 24-hour body clock. And your circadian rhythm is sort of dictated by your light and dark exposure, especially natural light. Our circadian rhythm is a little over 24 hours, and it tends to drift a little bit if we're not carefully watching over it. So one of the key things that I recommend to people when I first start working with them, and this is something that I've applied in my life recently, and it is getting early morning daylight exposure, right? So this basically sends a signal to your body, hey, the daytime has started. We're now on the clock, right? And so when you wake up, you want to make sure that you're getting outside as soon as you can. So where I live now, it's, sunrise is around 10 of 6, which is, I realize is quite early for some people to get out. But, within an hour of waking, like let's just say you wake up at 7, sort of the first thing you'd want to do is go out and spend about 10 minutes outside or on a porch that's open air, at least doing that without anything on your eyes. So without sunglasses on. The reason you don't want your eyes blocked with eyewear is that in order for this to all work properly, the light needs to actually hit your retina. And from there, it sends a signal to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is your circadian pacemaker. And that sends you all these signals, hormonal, neurotransmitter, regulatory signals. So it basically shuts off the melatonin from the night before. It helps boost your cortisol to give you energy, boost your serotonin for your mood. And it also at the same time starts to prepare the melatonin for the following night. So there are all sorts of wonderful benefits. And time after time, I keep hearing consistently from clients that was one of the big needle movers in transforming their sleep. So the second thing I would say in regards to keeping your circadian rhythm very strong and entrained is to wake up at the same time every day. That is really, really a key principle. And, a lot of people are like, what? Even on the weekends? Yes, even on the weekends, because your body and brain don't know the difference between the weekend and the weekday, right? So basically, when you wake up, you have adenosine starting to build up, which is your sleep chemical. And once you've reached about 16 or 17 hours, that adenosine sort of reaches its limit and needs to be released via sleep, like a kind of a chunk of sleep. And so what you can usually count on happening is that you're going to start becoming sleepy around the same time each night if you have that anchored wake up time in the morning. So you want to aim for give or take 30 minutes. You don't want to stray too far from 30 minutes because what can happen, and this happened to me personally when I was younger, is I would, get up every day at 6, but then on the weekend, I'd stay out till 1:00. I'd sleep until 9. And then Sunday night, I'd have a hard time falling asleep because my circadian rhythm got a little disrupted. Basically, it's called social jet lag. It's the same principle as jet lag, but you're not going anywhere. You're not traveling. And so Sunday nights are rough. Monday mornings are rough. And then the cycle just continues perpetually throughout the weeks and months if you don't kind of rein it in.
I'm so guilty of being a sporadic sleep schedule person. Like my weekends, I'm like, I'll plan to sleep in. I love the sleep. And then getting myself into any sort of morning routine or evening routine is hard because my day is not scheduled around like the sleep schedule, essentially. Unless I have to work, but even as a self-employed person, it's not like anyone's telling me I have to be in the office at a certain time. So it's tough for me to be there. I feel like there is this discipline that I need to tap into or, to get to that point. I need to experience the benefits to keep consistent with it.
Yeah. And, there's so many people who are in your similar situation and, you don't want to be too hard on yourself about it. But I think what you can do is try to, if you're interested, is just sort of make the smaller changes, maybe just have a little bit more continuity and regularity and see how you feel. You can kind of just baby step your way through it instead of making a radical change and then just observe how you feel.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably my best way to start. So I like that. So you're saying get some early light exposure, get your regular routine in. Any other tips that drastically kind of move the needle for your clients?
I think that also exercise has been really important. We know we have so much data out there showing that moderate activity, moderate physical activity can help with our deep sleep. It can help with our time to fall asleep, our sleep efficiency. And what the studies have shown is it's not necessarily like intense exercise, but it's moderate, right? So we want to just, aim to do something most days of the week, because what exercise serves to do is it builds your sleep pressure. So have you ever noticed if you had a day where you just got a lot of physical activity, maybe you just went on a hike or you did a lot of yard work, something above and beyond what your normal kind of routine would be, you notice that you're sleepier at night. You usually tend to have like a deeper sleep, right? That really does apply. So, I really work with my clients on establishing some type of exercise routine that's nourishing to them. We're not talking about running or HIIT, but it's something that they can do on a regular basis. I think a lot of people end up doing walking because they can actually multitask and do their walking outside. So they're getting that natural daylight plus their movement, right? So kind of habit stacking is nice for some people to do.
Yes. You mentioned sleep pressure. Is that just is that kind of defined as the feeling of sleepiness?
When you are sleepy, you're definitely experiencing some sleep pressure for sure. So yeah, you want that. And that's why that you often hear sometimes people say, don't take naps late in the day, because it's almost like you're snacking before dinner. You're like snacking on sleep so that when it comes time to go to bed, you've kind of like ruined your appetite a little bit by snacking on sleep. So one of the reasons why we discourage naps a lot for people who have insomnia is that it can kind of ruin your sleep appetite. So think about napping as sort of like snacking on sleep. So not to knock naps at all. I think they're really great, but you want to try to keep your naps before 3 p.m., keep them 20 to 30 minutes. I think if you're napping at 7 p.m. for an hour and you're sleeping from 7 to 8, and then you want to go to bed at 10, you're probably going to find yourself struggling to get to sleep a little because you released some of that sleep pressure on that nap late in the day or early in the evening.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like naps, it's like so tempting, like when you're tired to take a nap, but sometimes you do have to set some boundaries around like the time of day or how long you choose to nap. I know that's one thing I've intuitively had to do is keep naps earlier in the day and keep them short. Do you believe in power naps, like the 20-minute power nap? What are your thoughts around that?
Oh, yeah. I think those are the best naps for just like for a little kind of boost during the day. Like if you're feeling a little bit worn down or if you had a bad night of sleep the night before, I think a power nap is awesome to try to do. Not everyone is able to actually sleep during that 20 minutes, but even if you just close your eyes and rest, that's still giving you some benefits, kind of getting you in a calmer state for sure.
Okay.
So I recommend
that's
that.
so interesting. Okay. And another question that's popped into my brain is sleep with partners. Do you find that that is a challenge with many people who have sleep struggles? Like, do you recommend people sleep separately, or how do you approach that?
That's a hot topic. Yeah. So sometimes I think the most common scenario ends up where a woman who has insomnia has a partner who snores.
Oh, yeah.
And that can create
That's
a
so
lot.
funny.
And that was me in a former relationship, by the way, back when I had insomnia with a previous husband. And so it creates a lot of tension, I think, in a lot of relationships. But what I always urge people to do is like, if they have a partner who snores, address the partner from a place of concern and say, we need to kind of look into this snoring and to see if you have sleep apnea, because that can be pretty dangerous if it's not treated. And then there's this term called sleep divorce that's often used. And it's a really terrible term, but basically what it means is when you've made the conscious decision to sleep apart for various reasons, either someone snores, there's a mismatch in people's wake up and sleep times, so many reasons why. And it's a delicate issue, but I feel like it can be really helpful for certain people, especially with insomnia, to actually take a break from sleeping with somebody temporarily, or maybe just make adjustments where, we only sleep together on the weekends, and on the weekdays, we sleep, separately. So there's many different configurations. And there's a woman who wrote a book called, the name is Sharing the Covers. And it's a wonderful book on sleep and relationships. And she likes to use this term sleep alliance instead of sleep divorce because there's so much more of a positive connotation with it. Because, we're in this together. We're working on a shared problem. So I think a lot of it is in how you communicate the issue. Because if you're blaming somebody and you're like, you're tossing and turning and you're keeping me up, that person's going to feel kind of bad about themselves. They're not going to receive that well. A lot of this is in the delivery of the message.
Mm-hmm. I love the reframe of like, instead of sleep divorce, sleep alliance, because it feels like you're back on each other's team. You both want what's best for each other, which is I want good sleep. You want good sleep. Let's come up with a plan that makes us good sleepers together so we can have a better quality of life. I think that's such a great way to think about it. And I can't even believe that must be a super hot topic. That could be a totally different sleep episode.
Oh, yeah.
Gosh. It's not,
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a hot topic.
It is, I'm sure. I don't know much about the sleep world. You're my first professional in this podcast to introduce me and probably a bunch of listeners to all of these topics. So I greatly appreciate you on the show today. Before I let you go, I would love to ask you if you have any final words of wisdom for the listeners today who have been maybe looking to get some better sleep.
Yeah. So what I would really recommend is starting with the basics, sort of the getting your circadian rhythm straight by getting the natural light, a lot of light during the day as well. I didn't go as much into that. And keeping your sleep-wake cycle as regular as possible. Trying to dial in those basics first before you reach for the supplements or before you buy fancy gadgets. Those things are fun to have. I mean, companies send me those to play with and I enjoy it. But at the end of the day, it's really like our fundamental behaviors that improve our sleep. We have basically the tools within us and in nature to really get started on a better sleep journey without having to buy a lot of stuff.
So true. I think that's a good piece of advice to end with. And Morgan, I truly appreciate it. If anyone wants to work with you, how can they find you?
Sure. My website is morganadams.wellness and morganadamswellness.com.
Got it. That's your Instagram.
Yeah, I got my Instagram confused with my website. But anyway, on my website, you can find the opportunity to schedule a free consultation with me to talk to me more about your sleep issues. I also have a free mini course on there to help you establish pro-sleep morning and evening routines. And then again, on Instagram, I'm morganadams.wellness, and I do a lot of content there. Pop in my DMs, say hi, talk to me about your sleep. I love talking about it. Just, don't be a stranger.
Love it. Well, Morgan, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Meg.
All right, that concludes this week's episode of the Full and Thriving podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode of the show. When you have a moment, please head on over to Instagram and follow my recovery coaching account at Meg_McCabe to stay up to date on everything I'm doing in recovery land. And if you're feeling extra inspired, please send me a direct message to let me know how this podcast has impacted your life. I'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.